Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you're all healthy. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves. I'm Somini Sengupta. I'm a climate change reporter at the New York Times. And these days, with so much uncertainty and so much loss around us, there are really two things that order my day. One is, how do I feed my kid every day, several times a day? And two, the other thing I think about a lot is how her future might be irreparably damaged by climate change and what my role is in that. Which is why I am really, really pleased to be here today in this installment of the series that we're calling The Greenhouse. It's focused on how we live on this planet 50 years after the very first Earth Day in April 1970. Today, we're talking about how we can eat well and at the same time safeguard our future on this planet. What do those two things have to do with each other? Well, what we eat, how we eat, and what we don't eat, what we throw away, has an enormous environmental footprint. Food waste alone is just a really big source of the greenhouse gas emissions that are warming up the planet and causing these extreme weather events around the world. So if we can eat better and waste less, we can potentially improve both our own health and slow down climate change. So feel free to submit questions at any time during this event in the Q&A window. Please note that this event is being recorded. I am delighted to welcome our two guests who are going to give us tips on what we can do at home now that we are all in our kitchens a lot more than we were before. First, Matthew Orlando, head chef and owner at Amass restaurant in Copenhagen, Denmark. Nearly all of the food at his restaurant is produced organically. Some of it is produced in his garden. And Matt is a bit of a wizard at making sure every little bit of his food is used and not wasted. And he's going to share some of that with us today. Marcus Samuelsson is our other guest. He is the chef behind many restaurants worldwide, including Red Rooster Harlem. He is a longstanding judge on the Food Network show Chopped, the author of several books, including his latest, The Red Rooster Cookbook, The Story of Food and Hustle in Harlem, and also his best-selling memoir called Yes, Chef. In that memoir, I recall that Marcus describes his Swedish grandmother's philosophy to cooking, which I guess is called Sustainability now. And he writes that she made almost everything you ate from scratch and wasted almost nothing. And that really reminded me also of my own grandmother, Marcus. I suspect it reminds us all of our grandmothers. So a big hearty welcome to both of you. Matt, do you see me? There you are, Matt. How you doing? Hello in Copenhagen.
Thank you.
Before we get started on your cooking, can I just ask both of you how you're doing in this moment and how your restaurants are doing? Matt, you're in Copenhagen. Your restaurant is closed, but you can still sustain your staff at this time?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate. The government has came out pretty aggressively in the beginning with help packages for everyone. So we've been able to close down and retain all of our staff for the time being, which is, as a business owner, it really gives you a bit of peace of mind and gives you time to kind of make a plan when we come out on the backside of this.
That's amazing. Yeah. Marcus, you are literally sustaining people by feeding people.
Yeah. It's been probably the toughest time in my career, but it's also been, I would say, one of the most meaningful times. We turned Red Rooster in Harlem and Overtown and Marcus B&P in Newark into community kitchens and partner with World Central Kitchen and have served up to 27,000 people, a mix between first responders and just needy in the neighborhood. And yeah, it's about probably the most important work we've ever done. and it also was a learning curve to see, you know, the word restaurant. It's always sort of the soul of a community, right? It's almost something that people take for granted. But how do you imagine a neighborhood without restaurant? And those are the type of questions that we really had to face. And what is our role? And it's been difficult, but it's also been very rewarding of serving the community this way.
I think we're all having to reimagine not just how we live now, but reimagine our futures. So I am very excited by what I'm seeing on the screen in front of me. Tell us, Marcus, what you're going to show us how to make.
Yeah.
And what is that?
Well, I wanted to do something that spoke to my background, but also spoke to sustainability. I was born in Africa. I was born in Ethiopia. And very often when you think about sustainability, it's something that it almost lives like a European thing for wealthy countries. And, you know, depending on America's president, they're part of it or they're not part of it, right? But I want to show it's not a reflection of government. It's actually people. People for thousands and thousands of years, for many reasons, have thought about sustainability out of necessity. And the other big inspiration for me was my Swedish grandmother, where, you know, today it's called food cost, or you have to think about how to use everything, but it was also a necessity. So I'm doing charred roasted vegetables, something that everybody has at home. It's something that everybody can get at this time. And we're going to put it on top of an injera bread, which is really a staple of Ethiopian cooking. And it was interesting to me as to study this, like injera bread is made out of teff flour, a grain that is about 3,000 years old. And so, yeah, so it's charred vegetables on top of injera bread with a chickpea puree that we're going to thicken with the stems from the roasted vegetables. So, yeah.
So you're using the stems of the vegetables. You're giving us a plant-based protein, which is the chickpeas, also widely available, used in cuisines of many cultures. And have you pureed the chickpeas?
Yeah, so I wanted to get, is it okay for me to start the demo?
Absolutely, yes,
okay,
go for it.
So what I wanted to say was that, you know, in this pandemic, in this moment, it's pretty fascinating how we have to make choices that are very, very different, but they can also come out better. I remember, again, my Swedish grandmother talking about the Second World War, where you had to wait to get into a store. You had to wait to get flour and potatoes. Well, guess what? It takes an hour for me now to go into a supermarket in New York City, in Harlem right now. And as I'm standing in that line, I connect with her. And this is the moment where I really feel like this is what she was talking about. So during this time, once you get into the store, then there's another line by the protein side where there's fish or meat. And my wife and I pretty quickly said, you know what, we're gonna go vegetarian this whole time. Let's not even, it's about functionality, but it's also about how you feel. So this pandemic has really reshaped my life in terms of my cooking choices. So mostly we eat plant-based. It's been delicious. And being from a country like Ethiopia, where there's 220 fasting days, so the majority of people in Ethiopia are actually eating vegetarian food most of the time, and then the meat comes on big holidays. So the test really starts with a fermentation, right? We have the teff. You mix the teff flour with water. You put it in a plastic bucket overnight. It will bubble up. And the dough, the batter you get, it's almost like a crepe batter. And you cook it in a pan. You do not flip it. You only cook it on one side. And out of that, you get a crepe-like beautiful pancakes looking this way. And you kind of want to judge it what you call the ice, like sort of it's just cooked on one side. And the smell of this, the fermented, Matthew would love this. It's really nice and fermented. So in terms of the vegetables, I would say, again, go with the vegetable that you have access to, that is seasonal to you. Living in Harlem, we have access to great plantains, pumpkins. I have some broccoli and some mushrooms. So I thought that would be fun, but really go with the vegetables that, you know, make sense for you. So I'm just gonna take a pan and just throw in some shiitakes, some cauliflowers, and some broccoli. But it should be really, and these vegetables, you kind of want to undercook them a little bit, right? I took the liberty to also roast some plantains, right? Just roast them in the oven, and then just chop them up a little bit. I love roasted plantains, the sweet, you know, green plantains and the yellow plantains. For this, the yellow ones would be perfect. And I wanted the viewer, the reader, to think about sustainability from an ethnic place that sustainability is really all over the world. It does not have geography. I had the opportunity to work with the EAT Foundation that is based in Stockholm, that was founded by Gunhild Stordalen for 10 years. And it's been, and you know, every year we really just focus on sustainability and to share ideas with great professionals. And it's amazing how much I've learned, and we learned from chefs sort of sharing ideas. I have a little bit of pumpkin right here that I roasted, and I'm just gonna use a spoon like this. And the key thing here is a super flavorful sort of mixture of charred vegetables, right? And how do we drive the flavor in this? It's really with twofold. We char them, we undercook them. Something my grandmother would not do. Love her, but her vegetables were kind of overcooked.
So Marcus, while you're doing that, I'm going to just remind our readers they can submit questions in the Q&A box at any time in this event. And we've got about 3 minutes or so left in your cooking demo before we pivot to Copenhagen. So you put the pumpkin in, you've put the plantains in.
I put the plantains, I got the pumpkin going. The vinaigrette that we're going to toss this with is flaxseed. So we slow roast flaxseed. We add a little bit of smoked paprika or berbere is an Ethiopian spice blend, but it could be smoked paprika, a little bit of lime juice, lemon juice, and make an olive oil and make a nice vinaigrette, right? And here really comes about using all the leftovers, right? So it's really taking these wonderful stems that have lots of flavors. I'm just going to put them in a blender like this. I'm just going to buzz them.
Do you have the chickpea puree in there already?
Like that. This puree.
Is that chickpeas, Marcus, and broccoli stems?
So I have my chickpea flour that I've cooked for about 40 minutes, ginger, garlic, water, and a little bit of the smoked paprika. I have that here, right here. And then I'm gonna take my broccoli, cauliflower, and the stems of the mushrooms. Just gonna fold that in. And this is delicious, cold or warm, right? This is a perfect dip if you're watching, you know, if you're watching something online or on TV. This is a great healthy dip. So we're just gonna put that in the middle. You know, just scoop that up. Put a couple of scoops like that in the middle. Super healthy. And the spice that comes from the berbere or the smoked paprika mixed with this sourness, you know, and that's what I love with think about fermentation, right? It starts as a preserving technique, but it's really there today as a flavor enhancer. So I'm ready here. My vegetables are done, right? And as the vegetables are done, we're just gonna rip in some fresh herbs. I got basil. I'm just gonna rip them in here.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
We're almost done with this thing.
Yes, we're done with it. I'm adding in
Wow,
some
that was
cucumber
incredible.
for texture. And then comes the flaxseed vinaigrette. And again, toasted flaxseed, olive oil, a little bit of garlic, and citrus. Gives this great flavors, right? If you're gonna switch over to plant-based, if you're gonna switch over to food and utilize everything, the flavor has to be just as good, right? So you don't want to do this stuff unless the taste is not there, right? And that's the whole key here. I'm ready to play. So look at this. I got my broccoli, my pumpkin. Everything is ready. And this is a meal that, you know, definitely has ethnic Ethiopian base, but anyone can enjoy. You can eat it with your hands. You can try to eat injera with a knife and fork. Make sure you don't have Ethiopians around you because they will get very upset. But it's delicious. It's plant-based, and it's a way to utilize everything. And
Marcus, I would like
really
to teleport myself to your kitchen and dive in with my hands because I'm Indian and we roll like that too.
Great. So there it is.
That's beautiful.
So enjoy that, and back over to Copenhagen and Matthew.
That is beautiful. We are going to pivot quickly to Copenhagen. Matt, are you with us?
I'm there. I'm here.
That's great. Show us what you've got.
All right. So instead of, I wanted to focus on an ingredient that everyone has access to, and an ingredient that is especially important to, I would say, Danes. And thus, me living here for so long, it's important to me now. And that is potatoes. And potatoes have kind of been a lifeline to Danes during World War II when there was no access to marzipan, which is also a very important staple in Danish culture. They used to use potatoes and almond extract and sugar to make kind of fake marzipan when they couldn't get the real thing during World War II. So I wanted to focus on potatoes. And we have a saying at Amass that there's no such thing as a byproduct, only another product. And this is when you're cooking is a process of refinement. And through refinement, you will always create waste. And what we're trying to do is take that word waste or trash and kind of throw that vocabulary out and really focus on these byproducts as just another ingredient. And some of the processes we use a lot of fermentation to pull these flavors out. Some of these processes we use actually turn the byproduct into something that is actually more delicious than the original product itself. So I'm just going to walk you through I think what I like to call the exploitation of the potato. So my beautiful assistant, Christian,
hey everyone,
is going to pan down, and we're just going to I'm going to go through our components here. So we have potatoes. I like to make my mashed potatoes with a starchier potato, or I'm sorry, a waxier potato, a bit of lower water content. And mashed potatoes are something I think everyone is capable of making. If you're not capable of making it, hopefully your spouse or your better half is capable of making it. So when you make mashed potatoes, you generally peel the potato, and two things happen there. You're discarding the skin, which has the majority of the flavor of the potato, and two, you're discarding nutrients. I mean, most of the nutrients in a potato come in the skin. So then how do we avoid that? So we make our mashed potatoes as normal. No different there. I like to use a little yogurt in mine because I live in Denmark and yogurt has become a staple of my diet. But the skins of the potato. This is something that we've really come to fully, I'd say, understand at Amass, because we do a lot of fermented potatoes for our bread. So we produce a lot of potato skins. If you want to preserve the potato skin and use at a later time, what we do is we blanch them, cook them slightly, and then we dry them and roast them. And this is what that is right here. And this is something that is, I mean, you can eat this just like it is. You can also grind this into a powder. This powder becomes a concentrate of that potato flavor. And the uses of this powder are are endless. I mean, you can take this, you can sprinkle it over your mashed potatoes the next time you make mashed potatoes. You can take this, you can season different vinaigrettes with it. You can bake it into bread. You can go on and on. Another thing that you do is you take this powder and you can blend it with oil and make a roasted potato skin oil. This then can also be used in many different facets. Base for vinaigrettes. One thing that I really like to do with this is take this oil, make a mayonnaise, and then use that mayonnaise in potato salad. But I find myself, if I skip back to the mashed potatoes, I find myself to make really good mashed potatoes, you generally have to make more than you need. Because when you have a slightly larger volume, you can just get the potatoes creamier. You can get the ratios of cream and butter right where you want them, as opposed to like cooking 2 potatoes and making mashed potatoes for 2 people. I usually make mashed potatoes for 8 people, just for the quality. So you then can take those mashed potatoes, let them cool down. The next day, you can save them for a couple days. You add, if you have 4 cups of mashed potatoes left, you add 8 tablespoons of flour, 1 egg. And then I like to save all of our lemon skins. I put them in a 5% salt brine for a minimum of a couple days. And then you take those, chop those lemon skins up, mix those through this puree with the flour and the egg. In this particular potato cake that I made, we added basil, we added chives, we added caramelized onions. And this is my daughter. I was making these earlier today, and my daughter tried to steal, she's 2, 2 of these off the plate. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. These are for later. You can have them.
Did you at least give her 1?
I gave her 1, of course.
Okay,
of course.
good. And those potato cakes are with the peeled potato, or are you using the potato skin?
I'm using I'm using the leftover mashed potatoes from dinner the night before.
You're using the leftover mashed potatoes. Gotcha. We've got a couple of minutes, Matt. Tell us what else is on that counter.
So, and then one of the easiest things, if you don't want to go through this whole process, I mean, everyone has a lot of time right now. So I also myself have really been exploring the kitchen, but if you don't have the time to do this whole process with the potato skins of blanching and roasting and drying, the easiest thing to do, and maybe one of the most delicious things, you can really heat oil to about 375 degrees Fahrenheit and just throw the potato skins and fry them. Season them with salt, season them with whatever spice you want to season with, and you literally have potato chips.
That looks really yummy, those potato chips.
So that is my full exploitation of the potato.
I like listening to you both. There's kind of a couple of takeaways almost immediately. One is that sustainability doesn't belong to one cuisine. You don't have to eat one way. You can eat a variety of things that you already like to eat, whether that's plantains or potatoes or broccoli. It's many kinds of cuisines. And second, what you were saying, Matt, that what you might have tossed, the skin of a potato or the stems of the broccoli, it doesn't have to be tossed. It can be recreated. It can become something else. This sounds like fairly simply, you know. I watched Marcus toss those stems into the chickpea puree, and the idea of just roasting the potato skins, you know, in some hot oil and sprinkling some nice salt on it, sounds great.
But I think also, like, to understand sustainability, it's also about a different value proposition, right? And if as chefs, we have to learn how to cook. But if everyone, almost like a driving license, if everyone learns how to cook, sustainability becomes not even a label, it's just something you're gonna do. So for me, it's like, to be green, to be sustainable and moving forward, the more we can get people to cook. I mean, certain things we take for granted, that everybody has a language and so on, right? But cooking is right there because it's really the future of our environment. So the minute you learn how to cook, the endless of possibilities is going to be there. Challenge is right now that we don't value cooking enough yet, because we value maybe ordering or something like that higher. But if you know how to cook, it changes everything.
I mean, just to kind of play off what Marcus just said, you know, the mindset of the way that you cook is probably the most important key to this this process, because the technical part of it is something you can learn, and you can find out how to do this, and you can explore, and you can fail, and you can learn, and you can go through that process. But none of that's going to even matter unless you change your mindset, and you change it how you look at ingredients. And you know, a big part of, and back to the cooking part that Marcus mentioned, it's cooking is something that we all have to do, and either we order it or we do it ourselves, but we all have to do it. And so by taking something like cooking and really focusing on that right now, we can all have to ourselves immediately, it looks like you're having a super small impact on it, but globally, if we're all cooking, I mean, then it becomes something a bit bigger than just ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, Matt, of something that I wanted to ask you. Why is this important to you personally?
I mean, personally to me, I mean, the short answer is it's the right thing to do, and it makes my soul feel good. But just back to the cooking aspect of it, it's important for us at Amass. I mean, we are, and me personally, that we are doing something that is bigger than the restaurant. Because for me, a restaurant is something that is, a restaurant sitting by itself is something that is materialistic. It's a place where people come, they spend money to eat food and drink wine, and it's not something everyone can do. So how do you take a restaurant and make it more than that? I mean, like what Marcus is doing right now with Red Rooster, like that's amazing, feeding 27,000 people. Then your restaurant becomes more than just a restaurant. It all of a sudden it has substance, it has meaning. And what we're trying to do here is have an impact. I mean, impact is probably one of the most important words you can have in your vocabulary, especially right now. What can we do to have an impact, a more long-term impact on the people around us and the environment?
Yeah. Marcus, from where you stand, you know, you're in New York City where so many of our neighbors are facing hunger, many more than before. What does sustainability mean for you and for the communities in which you work?
Well, I think it's one of the core essence of the why we work, right? And sustainability in a community like Harlem, the core of it could be different than it would be maybe in Stockholm, let's say. But the DNA, and I think it goes back a little bit what Matt says too, you want to have impact and in your community. And when you're a restaurant, the word restaurant means to restore your community. Most people don't know that. And if
to restore.
Also, to restore, and you want to be in your community, but you also want to be of your community. So when we opened Red Rooster, you know, one of the first things that was important to me was for us to get a farmers market. There was no farmers market in Harlem 10 years ago. Now there's 6, right? And it's not just because of Red Rooster, because all of the restaurants have started to order that, right? So the whole supply chain changed, right? Now we've had impact. Second part of having farmers markets was that we wanted to have ingredients on that farmers market that spoke to the local community, right? So rather than, you know, if we don't have yucca and if we don't have plantanos in our farmers market, it doesn't speak to our community. Third, it was also about creating many different ways of payment. And I know these are not direct linked to sustainability, but they're linked to a shift that needs to happen. And great food shouldn't have an address. It shouldn't have a zip code. And I feel like for 15 years of my life, I was educating myself and cooked all over the world for the 1% of the 1%. And it was an incredible journey, and I learned a lot. Worked in France, a 3-star Michelin, and all that stuff. The last 10, I want to focus on how can I take that knowledge and have impact in a different way, right? In a much more democratic way. And I think sustainability a restaurant that doesn't live outside society, they're inside society. And if you open a restaurant today and you don't think about sustainability as a vertical, as something that you do as a restaurant, I actually don't think you're going to have a customer, because it's such a transparent society today, and customers want to do the right thing. They don't know right away what that is, so they want to be led to it. So sustainability is actually something that is just as important as water or electricity.
Yeah. What you know, with so many of us now cooking at home, one of the real tricks to cooking well at home and wasting less is planning well.
Yeah.
Can
Absolutely.
you walk us through a little bit that process? You know, when I'm shopping for next week, and as Marcus said, in New York City at least, if I'm going to the grocery store, I'm waiting in line for a long time. So I really need to make my list pretty carefully, know what I'm making for my family for the next few days. So can you walk us through that a little bit? Matt, you go first.
Think,
well,
for me, it's been really interesting because, you know, obviously you work a lot when you own a restaurant. And so to be home 5 weeks consecutively and cook dinner for 5 weeks every night has been something that I've never done this in my life. I've never had this time with my wife and my daughter consecutively like this, except we would take a vacation. But that vacation is never 5 weeks. So to be able to sit down and actually plan a week of meals, and you know, this is something, cooking is kind of the, you know, Christian and I were talking about this earlier. Cooking has been kind of the only real constant and kind of thing you can kind of routinely do. I mean, sometimes I wake up at 6:30 in the morning with my daughter and start doing mise en place for dinner that night. So
I love it.
But if you what I found is if you really plan your week and you plan the ingredients you're going to use, but those ingredients, a lot of times you can buy ingredients that carry over to another meal maybe 3 days down the road. And like the mashed potatoes into the potato cakes is a perfect example where you can naturally use a potato, get multiple uses out of it over a week. A chicken, Christian and I were talking about a chicken, man, there's nothing less of a chicken now when we get a chicken in. It's 4 meals worth of stuff. So if you buy something, or if you put something on your list, don't just think of it as potentially something for a particular night. Look at it like, okay, wow, I'll use a chicken for example. We can use the breast meat this night. We can use the thighs this night. We can use the bones to make a broth this night. We can use the leftover broth I made something super dirty last week. I took the leftover chicken broth with a bunch of vegetables in it and a bit of noodles in it and pureed it and actually used it in place of ricotta cheese on lasagna.
Nice.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But
Umami bomb. That's what I call it, umami bomb.
Right. So when you're buying a chicken, think about more than the roast chicken or the fried chicken that you're going to make with that.
Exactly. Think of it as multiple meals, and the chicken's just one example. It can be, potatoes, for instance. I mean, it can be when you put something on the list, look at it and be like, oh wow, maybe I can use this here as well.
Marcus, your shopping and planning tips?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to that, right? First of all, if you eat based on a spiritual compass, it actually makes it easier in a way, right? And in the majority part of the world, people do that. Maybe not so much in the West, but if you think about Africa, Asia, and that changes then how you shop and why you shop, right? The second part is just like what Chef said. I might start the morning by having red cabbage put in the oven at 7 o'clock. I might not use that until the next day. So I slow roast red cabbage in the oven on 250 Fahrenheit for 7 hours. That means I have red cabbage steaks for lunch the next day, right? And you think ahead. If you get, for example, we talk about chicken, or let's say talk about fish. The first thing, how do you order fish? You want to order sushi quality, grade 8 fish. but you also want to make sure that you leave with the skin and the bones. Now, what are you going to do with the skin and the bones? Of course, you want to scrape the bones. That's an amazing tartare as a snack. You want to simmer the bones. That's an amazing stock that, just like what Matt talked about, throwing in some noodles and some fresh vegetables. Now you have a ramen dish going here that, at least if you would be in Williamsburg, that would be $27, right? So, so there are so many ways that I feel like as chefs, we really can communicate. And what I love about, you know, what a restaurant, like what Copenhagen really has become, you know, not just, I mean, you think about Noma, but you think about everything that came out of that, right? And now you link Instagram to that. So now you can share these ideas, because it's important to share it. For chefs, it's easy for us. We wake up, you know, whether it's lentils or dried beans or, you know, we soak for the next day. But a normal person might not do that, right? So I think this is, the more we share that as chefs, what we think and take for granted, and you don't have to be a major chef like Matt, you could be a line cook and share that, because that knowledge is so important in these days.
So our listeners are asking some really, really good questions, including some very practical questions. One of them is, especially produce can go bad, fresh produce can go bad really fast. What are your tips for keeping those fresh, or to be able to reuse those parts later? And the other sort of related question is it important to buy seasonal fruits and vegetables? Who wants to tackle either or both of those questions?
Go ahead, Matt, I'll follow you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll answer the first one. I'll answer the second question first, because seasonal fruits and vegetables for me are the most important to buy. Because if you're buying a tomato in January, that tomato probably has a much larger carbon footprint coming from somewhere else in the world that is producing tomatoes than a tomato that you buy in July or August that's coming from just a few miles
next door. Right. Yeah.
So that's what some people don't make the connection to with buying seasonal and not buying seasonal, is that if you're not buying seasonal, the carbon footprint, the miles on those vegetables are quite extensive.
How about keeping fresh vegetables and fruits going for a little longer? Because they do spoil, especially now that we're approaching summer months.
They do. I mean, I guess that comes down to planning. If you're planning your meals for the week, then you are, you know, I wrote my notes, and when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, some of the questions, is that I think a big part of thinking sustainably is actually reducing food waste before it even happens. And a lot of times people are at the store and they're just over purchasing stuff because you're there and it's in front of you, and oh, that looks amazing and that looks amazing and I'm gonna buy that. And then you get home and all of a sudden you have a fridge that's full of stuff that there's no way you can eat within a week. So that kind of more precise buying and not overbuying, because, you know, in the Western world, we just overconsume. We overpurchase, we overconsume. That's just that's just the culture. So how do you tackle that? And that's by being aware of what you can.
So buy what you need. Yeah. Marcus, here's another question that I think is really cool. What are your favorite ways to use random bits of leftovers?
Yeah, so I just want to piggyback on the last question. Fresh vegetables can also be preserved, right? You know, think about pickling and preserving. If you roast something, let's say cabbage or Brussels or something like, bring them to a quick boil and then preserve them, and then you'll have them. Same thing with tomatoes, you know, some beautiful. So pickling and preserving, you need to think of that the way your grandmother or your auntie thought about it, and bring that back, because that is also a great way to include the family in cooking, right? Like, actually, I wouldn't be here with you guys today if it wouldn't have been for pickling and preserving lingonberries and mushrooms and labeling them. and in terms of, tell me the
There was
second question.
actually there was a related question to pickling. Wendy asks for your tips on how to ferment vegetables at home. So maybe just a really quick tip on fermentation.
Yeah, I mean, you could take, if you take, for example, 1 part of vinegar, 1 part of sugar, 2 parts of water, some bay leaves, you bring that to a boil. Let's say you have an onion and some carrots. You bring that to a boil and you pour that on top of the mushrooms or the Brussels or whatever you have, and you jar that. That will last you for several months, right? It's just a very simple way. There's definitely more complex techniques.
So that's your pickling technique. That's your shortcut.
That's a pickling technique.
What about fermentation? You mentioned that the teff grain you had fermented. Can you go over that really quickly?
Very simple. We take the teff and we add liquid to it, add water to it. What happens then, it starts to bubble up, right? We put it in plastic, it bubbles up. That then becomes our crepe-like batter that we make and you can ferment anything. You can take peppercorn, you can take any seed and ferment it, and it will last. And it goes from a necessity where you think about it as a flavor enhancer instead versus what it was maybe 50 or 100 years ago.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we in Indian cuisine, you can ferment rice, ground up rice, and make similarly a crepe with it, a dosa with it. So the other question that had come up was, what are your favorite ways to use random bits of leftover? I think both of you mentioned broth and soup. Any other tips?
Well, go ahead, Matt.
We when we kind of went on lockdown here, I kind of opened up the refrigerator and we hadn't gone to the store yet, and actually made Okonomiyaki basically that emptied out the refrigerator. Nice. And this is basically it's flour, it's egg, you can season it however you'd like. There's lots of ginger in there and stuff, and then you basically make this batter and then you fold all your little bits, and whether they're vegetables from the night before, or you can get really dirty and like chop your pizza up and fold it into it and cook it if you wanted to.
We've got like 30 seconds left. Any other using random bits of leftover tricks?
Well, I think a stir fry is really good, whether it's with a rice or with a noodle. And I also think you can add, just to build on that umami flavor that you get, have miso at home, whether it's soybean miso, or whether it's chickpea miso. Miso is a great sort of tool that I'm sure Matt uses a lot as well. And, that adds flavor, high heat cooking sometimes. You can start with the braised sort of slow heat cooking cabbage. You have leftovers, bits and pieces. You add in, now there's beautiful mushrooms or beautiful peas. Saute quickly, add some miso, add some rice wine vinegar, and you have a wonderful, wonderful saute that can last you for days.
Thank you both, really. Just enormous thanks for sharing your skills, for sharing your ideas, and for helping us, for giving us a little bit more to both step up our game and find some purpose in the kitchen. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you for joining us here at the Greenhouse Series. Just a reminder that a recording of today's event can be found on timesevents.nytimes.com, where you can also see our entire digital events slate. So thank you, Matt in Copenhagen. Thank you very much, Marcus in New York. You both take care of yourselves. Be well.
Can I just say how ironic it is that I'm a Scandinavian that moved to America, and Matt is American that moved to Scandinavia, and I'm raising an American kid, and he's raising a Scandinavian kid. I mean, that's just sign of the time, right?
It's beautiful. Yeah, we planned it that way.
Cool.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Bye.